Hi, and welcome to Strange, where we make sense of the unusual in the Bible. We take verses, passages, phrasing that is odd and weird and strange, and we interpret them and make sense of them, usually ending up in a pretty profound meaning and application for us. Today we have something that is marvelously weird and strange. In fact, it is a miracle of epic proportions in the Bible. Something that has happened only once. And it happens here in the book of Joshua, chapter 10. We're going to be looking at verses 12 through 14. So if you have a device with the scriptures on it, or if you have a Bible nearby, you can join us in Joshua chapter 10, verses 12 through 14. And the question we're trying to answer today is, what did the Lord do for Joshua in the battle against the Amorites in Joshua 10, 12 through 14? So you'll remember that Joshua is all about the advancing of the tribes of Israel into the promised land. That's basically what's happening throughout the book of Joshua. It is the call of Israel to go and claim their promised land that God had promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob all down through the line. This promise now has come real and true in the time of Joshua. Joshua goes throughout the land, conquering the land and the inhabitants of the land, driving them out. And of course, the Lord is with them in a powerful way. In fact, the Lord has commanded them to do such, to go in and drive out the inhabitants and inherit the land that He is giving to them. So we have in Joshua chapter 10 a strange thing. It truly is. It's odd because here you have Joshua battling against a people called the Amorites. Now they had taken possession of part of what was the promised land. And so Joshua and Israel are pushing them out of the promised land so that they can inherit the land. Well, of course, there's many battles going on, but Joshua in Joshua chapter 10, verse 12, and I want you to kind of see this for yourself here. It says, "Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Alian. So the sun stood still, the moon stopped, till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of the heavens and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. There has been no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel." That's amazing. That the sun stood still. The writer of Joshua here remarking that Joshua made this prayer, and God answered this immense prayer that the sun stood still for an entire day so that Joshua could do exactly what the Lord had commanded the people to drive out the inhabitants, to inherit the land. And so here we have something of an epic thing to ask God, to think about this, to ask God for this or that. But here Joshua asks a big thing. And it's a rather impossible thing if you ask me. Sun, stand still. Allow us to carry out the mission that God has given us. Allow us to have victory so that we can do what God has commanded us to do. Amazing. Amazing. He goes on and has great success, in fact, in this battle. And God allows this miracle to take place in order to glorify Him. And for His mission, God's mission, to be carried out in their obedience. Powerful stuff. Really powerful stuff. It's weird and strange, and the author of Joshua even says this, there hasn't been a day like this before or after. This is something unusual, really radically unusual. So what do we gain from this sun standing still? What do we gain from that? That we hear that Joshua fought and Israel prevailed as Joshua said, "Sun, stand still." We gain by the fact that we understand that God, for one, hears our prayers. And we can begin there because that's a mighty thing. That God heard Joshua and answered him with this miraculous thing. How incredible is that? Oftentimes we get bogged down, and if you're like me, you get bogged down in asking God for the little things. These little things along the way. But here Joshua has a sense for the boldness and courage to ask God for the big thing. For the big thing that isn't out of His will, it's actually in His will. And he asks Him in faith, boldness, courage. My friend, this is something I need to learn and you need to learn from the lips of Joshua. With the boldness to ask for victory. Not simply the small, not simply the minute, not just the daily, but the boldness to ask of the great. The boldness to go forward and say, "Sun, stand still." The second part of this is to realize that God can do such a thing. It's one thing to pray, but it's another thing to believe and understand that God, in fact, can make the sun stand still. My friends, that's where faith takes over. Faith believes not just in saying the words, but faith believes that the God that you're praying to can actually do what you're asking in boldness and courage to do. So here, God made the sun stand still. I'm going to ask you, do you have faith that God can come through for you? He can. And He wants to. But my friend, when you're praying, sometimes we're praying and hoping and wishing, but we're not believing. We're not believing that God can actually do this for which I ask. We need to believe. We need to trust Him that He is big enough, mighty enough, powerful enough to do what we have asked in faith. One last takeaway of this incredible miracle that God allows is this. When I ask and I pray in boldness, believing that He can do it, I must ask in His will. In His will. Yeah. Joshua knew that defeating the Amorites was the will of God. This is why God sent Joshua into the promised land and all of Israel into the promised land to drive out the inhabitants. And He even says, the Lord says, "I will be with you, Joshua. I will go before you." Yeah. Is this God's will to drive out the Amorites and to inherit the promised land? Absolutely it is. So in our prayer, oh yes, we need to pray. And we need to pray with boldness. Yes, we need to believe and believe that God is big enough to do what you've asked him to do. But my friend, the final check mark, the final green light to your prayer and to my prayer is it God's will? Is it God's will? Has God said in his word this very thing that you're praying? And if he has, then you have assurance. The Apostle John says, you have assurance that he's heard you, that he knows your prayer, and that in his time he will answer. So we don't go to God, my friends, and this is something that we need to turn away from. We don't go to God asking him to bless our mess, to bless our wickedness or our sinful lifestyle. We don't go to God to ask him to say, I really want to do this sinful thing. We don't do that. In fact, that's not God's will, and God won't be glorified by it. So we need to take heed to Joshua. Pray with boldness. Pray with faith in the Lord. And pray according to God's will. And when we do that, we may not pray, "Sun, stand still." But we know that the Father hears us. And we know his will is perfect. His timing is divine. And his heart is always for his children. I pray that this strange miracle in Joshua 10 blesses you. Today, I pray that you pray in boldness, pray in faith, and pray in his will. God bless you. Have a great week, and we'll see you here again next time.